but respect their boundaries. Yeah, so respect their boundaries as well. Um, Most such discussions will have a heavy involvement of an emotional component. So make sure that you don't avoid facing these emotions. Be present mindfully. When I say mindfully, I mean in the here and now without judgment, and listen actively. Acknowledge their feelings, let them know that it's okay to feel what they feel, and that it's also natural in the given context. Don't invalidate, right? Don't say something like there's nothing to be afraid of. That's a strict no, because we all know that there is a lot to be afraid of in these situations, especially in palliative care settings. So never dismiss. Uh, Many a times people do it with a good intent. They try to reassure, but reassurance can be very invalidating and very dismissive. So don't do that. Be okay with silences. They help. Learning to not be uncomfortable with silences, letting the patient take their time to process is very important. So please don't fill the silence with pointless communication. Let's say you told them something about the report, right? And they're just silent. They're not saying anything. Don't immediately start filling that silence with chatter. And I said pointless communication, right? Pointless because one, it is highly likely that the patient is emotionally overwhelmed, and whatever you're saying, they're not even hearing it, not receiving it. Or if they are receiving it, then we just distracted the patient from actually processing the information and their emotions, organizing their thoughts before they responded. So don't interrupt that process. Be okay with those silences, they are important. uh, then there is this thing of hope versus truth. So whenever we are delivering bad news, we can definitely do it with sensitivity rather than either hope or truth. We can find a balance between the two. uh, so we don't have to say we can't do anything more, there is no cure for your disease, there is no point in continuing to stay in the hospital. But at the same time, we also don't have to say if you believe and have faith you'll surely recover. We can have a midway. We can say something like, sorry, I'm afraid there is no more curative treatment available for this disease, but we can definitely keep you comfortable with medicines and regular monitoring. We are here for you. So you're giving them hope, you're not taking away their hope. But at the same time, you're being truthful, you're honest, you're not giving them false hope. That's very important. That balance is very important, especially in the kind of setups that we're going to work in as palliative care professionals. And I know that it's not easy to do so. It's very natural to want to reassure. Um, so it might take practice also at times, but we always need to keep in mind that false hope is the worst. Eighth, next is confidentiality. Um, so always reassure the patient that sensitive details that they might not want to disclose are completely confidential. Respect their boundaries about what they want to tell, what they don't want to tell, what they want to discuss, what they don't want to discuss. Mm, always uh, always have further inquiry. So, especially in problem behaviors, let's say you have a patient who's not eating, there is social withdrawal, there is non compliance, they've stopped taking medications. Usually, there is a deeper underlying problem. So, always inquire about the why behind that behavior. Don't just start lecturing them about the behavior, or don't start convincing them that you need to take the medicine. Probe more, see what's actually happening. So, to sum all these things up, you start with open ended questions, let them lead the way, you speak simply, validate their feelings, adhere to core principles, and then end it by summarizing all that you discussed. Make sure the doubts are answered and ensure a follow up. Right? I hope that was pretty clear. I see something in the chat. Okay, I had an interaction with a patient who used to be depressed always and was silent. I initiated a conversation with him by asking him about his achievements during his college days. He immediately opened up and was eagerly looking to talk about himself. Is this a good way of communication? Yes, definitely. As long as you got the patient, see, because ultimately what you need first is rapport. Without rapport, you won't reach a place where the patient is trusting you enough to have difficult conversations with you. So definitely starting with something easier for the patient to talk about, where they are likely to open up, they're likely to have a rapport with you and start trusting you is definitely something that you need to do. Uh, all right. Any other questions? Uh, okay, I see one more question here regarding the non-communication skills. If the patient is not ready to have the kidney transplant, but the caregiver is ready to spend for the transplant and agrees. So, if the clinical team and the patient's caregivers are ready to do what is best for the patient and goes on with it, does that come under non communication skills as well? Yes, it does. First of all, legally, you cannot do that. If your patient is not a minor, without consent, it's basically it's a very unethical thing to do. And you will learn more about this in the second session of communication, where you will speak about breaking the bad news, collusion, and how we need to deal with these decision making processes if either the family or the patient is not agreeing to it, and how to actually go about it. That will definitely be covered in the upcoming session of communication. And I think that time your what exactly to do in that situation will be more clearer to you. Okay, so I hope there are no more questions. We can move on. All right. So next slide.
Ma'am, may I just ask one
Yeah.
little question?
Yes.
Does this the educational status of the patient that leads to a change in the mode of communication? I have found in my practice, because people
Mm-hmm.
who are educated to certain level, they
Hmm.
find medical terms more at home, and they feel that they are being
Absolutely.
honored because of their education, and they
Yes.
communicate in a better way rather than those
Yes.
people who are not so much educated.
Right. Right. Absolutely. That definitely happens. So that is why, we need to adjust according to the patient. We can't expect the patient to adjust according to you. So let's say you have a very educated person, highly educated person in front of you, and you start explaining to them like from the scratch, very basic, that is again going to rupture your rapport. You will have to use certain terms there, certain technical terms. But at the same time, if there is somebody illiterate sitting in front of you, then you need to start from scratch so that they understand. So we need to keep adjusting according to who is sitting in front of us. Yes. All right. So, okay, we saw what to do. Let's also see what not to do. Okay. Because that is equally important. Sometimes we, uh, inadvertently tend to do some of these things. So, very important. Do not moralize, do not philosophize. In palliative care settings, none of your patients is in a state of mind to hear you say something like, "This life is a gift by God. How can you think of throwing it away if somebody is being suicidal or something?" Do not do that. Don't moralize or philosophize. Avoid comparisons. Avoid saying things like, "Look at that patient. They are also in pain, right? But are they crying? There are so many others who are in a worse condition than you in this ward." Never say something like that. Avoid comparisons. um, Avoid meaningless statements that can stop further communication. So, for example, my patient is actually opening up to me, and I say something like, "Oh, there's nothing to be afraid of." That's a meaningless statement. I know that, the patient knows that, but that's just creating a block. My patient is going to stop communicating about their concerns with me. So, don't do that. Jargon, again, as I said, let's avoid jargon. So saying something like, the carcinoma is quite radiosensitive, which increases chances of remission. Yeah, my patient did not understand 0% out of this. So avoid jargon. So don't say metastasis, say spreading. Keep it simple, keep it understandable. Uh, Making assumptions is something to be avoided, definitely. Uh, always, always inquire what made them do this, what made them ask the question. Always inquire about their reasons, don't assume. Avoid false reassurance, as we already discussed. Avoid being condescending, avoid saying things like, do you know more than the doctor? Or avoid saying things like, the doctor knows what they're doing, so just keep quiet and listen to what they're saying. That's very condescending, so don't do that. Be respectful. Don't force your beliefs on the patient. Might be spiritual, might be otherwise. No sympathy, of course, we all know that. No inappropriate humor. I mean, thankfully I haven't seen anybody in the psychosocial area of work do this. But sometimes there I have seen physicians, I have seen other people who are not so well versed with psychosocial issues use inappropriate humor. So saying something like, "Oh, so you want your final visa? Is it?" Very, very inappropriate, very insensitive. So they might be doing it to lighten up the mood, but that's not really helping the patient. Avoid thoughtless honesty. Yeah, so it's not just about telling them the truth or just what you say. It is also about how you say it and when you say it. So be honest, but make sure it's in the right context at the right time in the right way. And avoid lies, because as we already know, lies break trust. So, next slide. Okay, let's just put things in a sequence so that it's easier to put into practice. Okay. So if we had to give steps for effective communication, what would we do first, and then what, right? So there are these 7 steps. Firstly, you would build a relationship. Then you would open the discussion. Then you would gather information. You would understand the patient's perspective, share information, arrive at an agreement on problems and plans, and then close the discussion sensitively. This is what you would do specifically in palliative care. What do I mean by that? Firstly, build a relationship. So set the scene, make sure you have time, make sure you have privacy. If it's in a ward, make sure you're at least closing the curtains, things like that. Preferably, you could be sitting down at eye level, not too close to invade private space, but close enough to lean forward, touch the patient, hold their hand if the need arises. Convey empathy with your expression and with statements such as, I see that you're very worried. The important thing here in the building the relationship stage is to convey that you care, right? That's very important. Secondly, once you have that relationship, then you open the discussion. And I think, sir, what you had asked the question about talking to the patient about their college life, etc. I think this will answer the question. What you did was basically the first step. You were building a relationship. And only then you would start opening up the discussion about these difficult things. So, second stage, when you open the discussion, you acknowledge their feelings, their pain, loss, acknowledge suffering that makes the patient feel that she's or he's understood. Don't dismiss any of these emotions. Listen actively. Of course, we all know that active listening involves eye contact, appropriate facial expressions, empathy, body, verbal responses like saying, yes, I see, or um, asking, like, in between we have these little things which we say, like, or could you tell me more? Things like that. So it also involves encouraging the patient by repeating, paraphrasing. So do all of that when you open the discussion. Listen to what is said, but also to what is not said. specifically facial expressions and body language, which might indicate that the patient is suffering but not disclosing about it. Then you start gathering information. When you opened up this topic, the difficult topic, then you start gathering information about what the patient knows. So explore and find the patient's level of understanding. What does she know? How much does she want to know? All right. And then you use open questions, you use statements which invite responses. So you ask things like, what do you think might be the problem? Or what worries you the most? Mm. Be empathetic again. That must have come as a shock to you, things like that. So gather information about what they know. Don't immediately jump in with information. And when you understand how much they know, also understand their perspective. So what do I mean by perspective is they might have certain information, but two people who have the same information might feel very differently about it, might attach very different meanings to it. So what does my patient feel about it? What questions do they have about it? Be prepared for emotional reactions at the stage. There might be sobbing, there might be anger, silence, despair. The patient might refuse to talk to you. Any of this, be okay with any of these emotional reactions. Be prepared for them. How to deal with these again is something that will be covered in the second session of communication. And here it might also be necessary to facilitate sharing. Because see, many a times what happens is patients are they'll readily tell you about their concerns, but they might not tell you readily about their perspective about it because they don't realize that you want to know about it. So you might need to facilitate sharing. You might have to use things like, could you tell me your thoughts? Could you tell me how you are feeling about it? Things like that, so that you understand their point of view. Only after you've done all of this, you have a good relationship with them, you start the discussion. When you start the discussion, you gather all the information, you understand how they feel about that information, and then you share information, additional information that, let's say, for example, my patient doesn't know what has happened. Okay. And I gather that in the third stage, gathering information that, okay, the prognosis is unknown, the diagnosis is unknown. I still understand the patient's perspective because there is still uncertainty. There is still, so then I have to ask questions like, what do you think it could be? How do you feel about coming to the hospital? And only then I reach the stage of sharing information. So when I share information, uh, again, let the patient decide the agenda for further discussion. In other words, what my patient considers important must be discussed at the stage. If they want to postpone discussion about further treatment, that should be allowed in a reasonable time frame. The patient has a right to know everything, but they don't have a duty to know everything, right? So you can't, if they ask you, you cannot deny giving the information, but you don't have to compulsorily give the information when they are telling you, "Mujhe abhi nahi sun, I don't want to listen to this right now." So confirm what the patient really wants to know. So always take permission before you're sharing information. And I say permission in the sense explicit permission. Truly ask them, do you want to know, or can I tell you something about XYZ? Use common conversational language depending on the patient's educational status, and check understanding at every stage. With every little bit of information that you're sharing, keep checking that they've understood it correctly. Then you arrive at an agreement regarding the problems and plans. So, what happens at this stage is you summarize the problems that were brought out by the patient, you suggest a course of action, you answer any questions, and you finally reach a course of action that's acceptable to the patient, making it clear that it's not an ironclad contract and that these plans are negotiable. And lastly, finally, you close the discussion and you do it very sensitively. You avoid abruptness. You review and you summarize the discussion before you finish, and you always leave the door open to talk again. Yes. And of course, not all of this happens in one single session. For some, it might take weeks. For some, it might happen within 2, 3 days. For some, it might be, you know, like depending on from each person to person, it's going to take a different time frame, a different timeline. So make sure you're flexible with it and you don't have to cram everything in 1 or 2 sittings. So take your time. And finally, is anyone wondering what happened to S? I just told you the first half of a story and we stopped at the interval. So my patient whom we visited at the start of the session, what did I do when I met her? I did exactly this thing that you see on the screen. I did exactly this. I built a rapport. I introduced myself and told her that I had come to speak to her about her illness and to know how she's doing. The moment she realized I was not here with an agenda, but with genuine concern about how she was coping, she opened up. And the first thing that the lady told me was when she went to that doctor, she had heard the word kidney for the first time in her life. She had no clue what it meant. She had no clue what it did. Basically, when she was told her kidney is not functioning, it sounded alien to her. It had no meaning. But she, through the non-verbal signals, of course, she realized, she sensed that there was some seriousness in the atmosphere. So she came home and, with the help of her son, she Googled kidney. And so she understood a little bit about what it was. Now, people who could communicate the right information, like the doctors, were mum, but there was no shortage of people with baseless information who had no qualms or questions about, is this true? How is it going to impact her or her family? So she heard all kinds of stories about how this means that she's going to die, all sorts of scary, tragic stories filled with negativity and despair. So, very naturally, she did her best to not listen to them. And in that entire process of, in an attempt to not listen to them, she overcompensated by denying the seriousness of what has happened. She was tired of the 30 pills that she had to swallow every day. She had tons of questions and no one to answer them. So we started right at the beginning with what a kidney is and what it does. Most importantly, that there are two of those and we can function with one. She needed to know that she is not asking her parents to sacrifice their lives for her by asking them to give her their kidney. So she cried, she let things out, she asked all the questions, she expressed her needs of how uncertainty brings fear, how anxious and worried she is for her son, who was grown up too soon in this entire ordeal. And if she were to know what was going to happen and what the doctors are doing, she would be much better prepared. She was very clear in her head, very sorted. She knew what she wanted, clear communication. That was her need. Knowing what had happened to her, knowing what was being done to her, knowing what could happen to her, realistically. Simple needs. So at the end of the first session, I did tell her that she was free to get in touch if at all she had any doubts at a later point as well. After the first consultation, she became much more cheerful. She started expressing more openly to everyone, including her husband. Communication at home improved. Uh, we also began meeting her son periodically as well, which eased a big load off of her shoulders. She began actively working towards treatment, taking the initiative to tell her family about transplant and related issues. Again, we helped her with that. So she had not done that until then because she didn't know what to tell them. She didn't know what a transplant was. So I met her family along with her and her husband. We discussed what treatment options were available. currently, after checkups and after matching, her mother, who is in excellent health, has come forward as a donor. After discussions within the family, that definitely took some time. It didn't happen in a session, but her mother has come forward as a donor, and currently is taking her medications, and she's taking them with courage and hope in her heart. She's fine. Okay, I see some things in the chat. Okay. Most doctors hate us giving information what to do in such cases. Don't like or want us to give away information to the patients, primarily for the fear of losing the patient to a competitor. Okay. I understand that this is a very practical limitation. And sometimes we just have to work around the limitation or within the limits of that limitation. So you might not be able to share all information with them. There might be times when you might have to tell the patient that I understand that this is your concern, and I'll let the doctor know, and you can speak to them about this, about the medical part of it. But you can definitely address all the others. You can definitely address the psychological, the social, and the spiritual. So if you look at palliative care, we have 4 different areas of well-being. Physical is just one of them. There are 3 more, and it's our duty to deal with all the other 3. And there's a lot of work to do in that area. So make sure that you're dealing with that at least. Make sure. So let's say, for example, there is uncertainty about the information. At least work with that. At least work with the anxiety. At least work with helping them deal with their emotions. Whatever that you can do in a given setup, because not every setup is going to be completely cooperative, where you get complete freedom to do what needs to be done. So within those limitations, whatever is possible to the best of our abilities, that we can definitely try to do. Yes. Thank you so much. I hope I have conveyed the basics of what communication is, and you will definitely learn more and about more specific problems in the second session. So if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to ask.
So thank you so much, ma'am. So it's time for your queries or doubts. You can use the chat box or you can comment. You can share your feedback also. So I think there is no doubts regarding the topic. Like you have explained everything in minute, in detail regarding the communication, like the do's and don'ts. So thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope there is no more doubts. You can share your feedback also.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Mukta ma'am, for the wonderful presentation. Thank you, Shilpa, for the facilitation. Thank you, everyone, for joining and making it an interactive section. Let's see in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you.